So now that the legislative session has ended in Maryland, I thought that we could give Governor Wes Moore some space, right? Some breathing room and lay off of him for a little while. But I don't think that's going to be possible because there are these new ads that came out on Baltimore airwaves boosting Governor Wes Moore's budget and his whole persona, I guess. I don't know. It's very awkward, very weird. And the question is, why? Welcome to this week's episode of Straight Talk with Europe C. Morgan. We've got a whole bunch of stuff to get into, but I want to get started with these kind of, I don't know, these very strange ads that have popped up on Baltimore radio waves. Listen to this clip real
Normally,
quick.
things are chaotic, but here in Maryland, I feel like the governor, he's been on top of it. We should tell Governor Moore that his policies are on track. Keep making our economy strong.
So that's just a little snippet of one of the ads that has popped up, and they've been put out by this organization called America Works. It's a political nonprofit. And here's the context, right? So Governor Wes Moore, everybody knows, like he's been really, popular. Now, popular does not mean effective, right? He's been very popular, or his personality has been very popular. And this legislative session, I think, was one of the first times that he really hit a brick wall in terms of, hey, you really got to do this job, and it's hard, and people are disagreeing with you. And apparently, even Democrats in the legislature did not agree in large part with Governor Wes Moore. He came in with a massive surplus, a $5 billion surplus, and now we have over a $3 billion deficit. So there was a lot of money spent, a lot of people angry, and especially during this legislative session, because it makes it very hard to hide. Throughout the rest of the year and over this past 2 years, it's been very easy for him to, go on TV or go be on MSNBC and just kind of like be elsewhere. And especially during the presidential campaign, because he was used as a surrogate for the Kamala Harris campaign and before that for Joe Biden. So he could, be out there boosting them. And it was easy for him to escape what's going on here. That is not the case anymore, especially since this last legislative session happened. And there were a lot of questions about his proposals, his bills, what he was going to push for, and a lot of frustration and a lot of anger. And you started to see this massive rift between Governor Wes Moore and the Democratic Party in Maryland, which, for those of you who don't know, it is not a normal Democratic Party, right? It is a very, very progressive, like in some cases, they are more progressive than California Democrats. So you think they're bad? Oh, check out what's going on over here. So since then, right, there have been a lot of disagreements because like I said, he on one hand is saying like, "Oh, we lower taxes, but we also raise taxes at the same time." It's a very strange thing, and people are starting to get very frustrated about it. So I'm sitting here back here thinking, like, I've been involved in politics now for more than 20 years, and these things are very, very cyclical. Cyclical. Is that the word? They come in cycles. Okay, and the cycles are very, they're very time sensitive. So like campaigns don't usually start getting ramped up until about a year. Now, behind the scenes stuff happens, but they don't really get ramped up until like 12 to 13 months before the election because people only have so much attention span. So I'm sitting here wondering, thinking, like, why are these ads coming out now? It's 18 months before his reelection. And I only played a clip for you there of what the ad says, but there are other ones that are encourage. There's a phone number. You can call the governor and tell him what a great job he's doing. And it reminds me of like somebody who sends flowers to themselves to make somebody jealous. Like, look, somebody does love me. And it's very cringe is the word. But it's cringe for a reason, right? Like I will say, like you got to have a lot of I don't really know what it is. You had to have a lot of something um, to put that kind of material out there and pretend like you yourself don't think this is very cringe. So I guess kudos to Governor Wes Moore. I don't know. But I'm asking myself, like, why are you doing this now? What's the benefit of doing this now? Now, some of it, of course, may be I think that it's because Wes Moore is looking at two different paths right now and this is just me from the outside looking in, but there's a lot to see here, okay? This is a guy who I don't care what he says. His plan is to run for president. Like, I'm not that stupid. Like, we can be friends and we can, yes, you're governor now. And so that is going to be your focus while you're in office. Sure, no problem. But please don't tell me that you're not considering running for president in the future because I am not an idiot and I would appreciate that you didn't talk to me like an idiot, right? We can be honest with each other. And so, but I think that it seems like his original plan was I'm going to go run for governor of Maryland and I'm going to be governor for as long as I need to then run for president. It is very clear that this is a stepping stone. And if I was Wes Moore, like that's really not a bad idea if you think about it on paper, because Maryland is a solid blue state. How much trouble can you get into in Maryland, right? You are a Democrat. This is a very Democrat state. It's not like a state like Pennsylvania, which is a swing state, right? You've got a good number of Republicans, good number of Democrats, and it could swing either way. Neither party is totally in control, as opposed to Maryland, where Republicans are outnumbered 2-1. So Democrats can do whatever the hell they want to. It really does, like, just have at it. And they have, which is why we have a massive deficit. But I think Wes Moore had looked at this and said, okay, this is a good state to run for governor, because he can make an agenda. Everybody's going to be on his side. Everyone will love him. And like I said, how much trouble can you really get into in 4 years? Well, he's finding out. Because in those 2 years, like I said, we had a $5 billion surplus. Now we have an over $3 billion deficit. Everybody is mad at him, from the, economic, the climate change progressives to the teachers union to, like, he managed to piss off everyone. And he recently vetoed a reparations bill, which pissed off even more people. And so, not Republicans, but Democrats, right? And so now I think he's looking at this, and if you look at his polling, his popularity in the state, it went down from 61% recently to now it's at 55% in January. And that was January, right? So I'm wondering if maybe there was some internal polling that's like, you need to boost your numbers, right? And you can't be the one that does it. So there in comes this America Works USA, this political nonprofit that says, we're going to run these ads like pumping you up and telling everybody how great you are, which to me just reeks of desperation. It is really, really desperate. And so I think he is either trying to rehabilitate his image in Maryland, or he is getting ready to take that step and run for president. Because again, like I'm just a fly on the wall here, but I am looking at this from what I would think would be his perspective. You can stay here and try to fix what's going on in Maryland, and that's going to require working with the very progressive Democrats. It's also going to create a political resume. Now, here's the danger with a political resume. There are some people, like, say, Governor Hogan, when he got elected. He was our Republican governor in 2014. There is a benefit to not having a political resume. And the benefit is that you're not on record for anything, right? So they can't point to you. There are people who kind of like work their way up, right? They start as a council person or a state delegate, and then they're their state senator, and then whatever, they like kind of move up. The benefit of that is that you get to know the system, right? You get to build a base. The negative is that you have a history, you have a political resume. And now people can say, yeah, but they can start digging up your past votes and things that you have supported or not supported in the past. And those can become really critical in an election. Wes Moore didn't have any of that. He got to build like this entire public personality and run only on that. Now that he has been governor for the last 2 years, oh, there's a lot on his resume now, right? All the things that I just named off, particularly things like the reparations bill, which really angered a lot of Democrats in Maryland, his economic policies, like things like that are really starting to chip away at this big beautiful picture that he had, of like the perfect candidate. And so, like I said, with Governor Larry Hogan, the benefit of him, he ran in 2014 and he was a businessman. That's all people knew about him. That was it. And he started this organization, Change Maryland. But really, like his political resume was whatever he wanted it to be. I think Wes Moore may be looking at the situation now and saying, well, this resume is not looking so pretty. So either you can try to fix that, or you can just call it a day and say, let's start looking at what a national campaign would look like. And the fact that he has been all over the national media, honestly, since he started running for governor, is not anything new. But one thing I noticed, it's the way that he is now being discussed when he's not in the room. Like the little plugs that are being made for his benefit. And one of them, the show The View, right? They were actually, so I want you to listen to this clip because it highlights the fact that he is being plugged, right, in these random places to, I think, start putting it in the minds of not Marylanders, but Americans that, hey, this guy's doing really great things. Just, like put that in your back pocket. And then when the Democratic primary comes up for president, this is going to be your guy. Let me give you an example about that. This comes from The View. And just so you know, they are talking, I think in the context of this clip is they are talking about how to talk to men, the way that men have been feeling in society lately and how we should be talking to men. I won't play the whole thing for you because it's terrible, but uh, listen to how the host here just kind of plugs Wes Moore.
You don't say, how do we reverse produce it to get a vote? It's a waste of money and it's a vapid approach at a real problem. Do what Governor Wes Moore is doing right now. He's directing his administration to implement targeted solutions to uplift men and boys. That's going after the statistics. And when he was here on our show, he said, the data speaks for itself. This isn't an opinion. So look at data and solve problems. Don't try to solve elections by reverse producing votes. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me.
No, great. It doesn't make sense to me. So, first of all, did you notice how like that conversation had nothing to do with Wes Moore? And this is a daily talk show, I think they come on 11 our time, and they just like sneak his name in there. Oh, look what he's doing in Maryland. Well, first of all, I didn't know he was doing that, and I'm in Maryland. Some of the stuff that he has talked about on national TV, I just want you all to know most of us in Maryland are sitting here scratching our heads like, are we talking about the same person? Because none of this rings a bell to me at all. I didn't even know that you were doing this. And they're plugging it as if like, oh, this is the standard for what we should be doing. And if you're listening to this and not like watching the clip, you should go back and watch the clip because she's like reading it like on a cue card, like somebody slipped it to her and be like, oh, this is the part where you start pumping up Wes Moore. Right. So anyways, I just think I think that he's at a crossroads and he is either going to decide, like, I'm going to stick with Maryland, we're going to fix this resume, or good luck, America, because I think he's coming real soon. Thanks for listening to the Europe C. Morgan Show. Make sure that you add us on Spotify, and you can also catch us on iTunes and YouTube.
So a 3-judge panel ruled unanimously that the statute he used, known as IEPA, does not grant the president the authority to impose as broad of tariffs as we've seen. They wrote that IEPA does not give unbounded tariff authority to the president and that the statute can only be used for unusual and extraordinary threats. They said they don't believe the trade deficit fits that definition.
I don't like that acronym, IEPA. So what she's talking about there is the International Economic Emergency Powers Act from 1977. So this topic, I don't know how you feel about Trump, but I can tell you that we are starting to have some problems. And I don't mean starting, like we've had some problems with the way that he treats the judiciary. And so here's what's going on in this segment, right? So there was the U.S. Court of International Trade in D.C. They blocked the president's use of tariffs based on this particular act from 1977, right? Now, why is this important? It is hugely important because if you're like me, I have at this point stopped checking the stock market. Like I just don't. Talk to me in a few years, probably after Trump's presidency, because there is just too much back and forth. The ping pong game of tariffs. 1 minute he's threatening tariffs, then he's imposing tariffs, then he's walking them back, and then he's raising them. I can't keep up at this point. I don't know how economists are doing it, but I can't keep up with the tariffs at this point. The issue here, though, is not specifically the tariffs themselves, but whether or not the president even has the authority to impose these tariffs. Like, why didn't we ask that question in the first place? And in raising that question, right, he has now come back against judges again. He's always mad at judges. And I got to tell you, like, you got to stop. Because there is a huge misunderstanding, I think, from Trump and Trump world about the role of judges. And that's what I want to talk with you about. But let me just kind of back up real quick. Let me lay out the foundation here. So there was this 1977 act. That's what he's using it for. It's allows the president to stop all transactions with foreign adversaries that pose threats, but it does not specifically permit tariffs. So that's the problem. He uses this act, and the act does not specifically allow him to use tariffs. And then, oh, by the way, there is the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. And so even folks like Senator Rand Paul, right? Super Republican Rand Paul, but like more libertarian leaning, but super Republican Rand Paul. Tariffs are taxes, and the power to tax belongs to Congress, not the president. Again, that's Senator Rand Paul. Our founders were clear. Tax policy should never rest in the hands of one person. So this court, the international, what is it? The U.S. Court of International Trade in D.C. blocked his tariff, saying you don't have the authority to do this. Well, then what happened? They appealed, it got reversed by another court, and so now they're trying to figure out whether or not he actually has the authority to do this. Now, on the one hand, we could just make this way easier for everybody and, I don't know, Congress act, since it is real. Like, if there is a question about whether or not he has the authority to do this, then Congress should act. And specifically, when the administration is going out and saying that we have a mandate from the American people, okay, great. So then it shouldn't be that hard to get it through Congress, right? You have the House, you have the Senate, you have an alleged mandate from the American people, then there should be no problem with Congress passing some bill or something to allow you to do what you are trying to do. But I think that's where things get questionable. Now, I have to tell you, Caroline Leavitt, who was the White House spokesperson, right? She had a press conference on this, and I want you to hear what she had to say about this issue.
Last night, the Trump administration faced another example of judicial overreach. Using his full and proper legal authority, President Trump imposed universal tariffs and reciprocal tariffs on Liberation Day to address the extraordinary threat to our national security and economy posed by large and persistent annual U.S. goods trade deficits.
Back up one second. So I have an issue whether it is a Republican or a Democrat that is talking about judicial overreach when it doesn't exist. Judicial overreach would be an example of judges doing things that they are not allowed to do for, say, political purposes or maybe personal reasons. They just don't like this, right? When we're talking about an act that specifically lays something out and specifically excludes something, then that is not judicial overreach. That would be like my children telling me, like, oh, that's parental overreach because you told me I had to go to bed on time. No, that is my job. That is my authority. I'm the one who decides bedtimes in this house, right? And sometimes the president uses, not sometimes, a lot of times, he uses he uses laws or bills, emergency acts that give him emergency powers in emergency situations for things that are everyday common. These are things that should be going through Congress. These are not emergency situations. For example, one of the last times that this act was used was after 9/11, and it was used to block the assets of terrorist organizations. Those are the types of emergencies that this act envisioned. It's kind of like using the emergency room for your primary care, right? There are certain situations in which there is an emergency and you should do that. And then for the rest of it, if you got a cold, if you need a checkup, emergency room is not the place to do that. That is not overreach. However, the president has this uncanny ability to play the public trump card. And by that, I mean, like, let's just back up. Like, I don't know him personally, obviously, but I have known of Donald Trump since the Home Alone days, okay? This guy is not new to me. I was there for the, what's that show about You're Fired? The Apprentice, right? Like, this guy is not new to me. One thing, regardless of how you feel about him, you have got to say that this man is a master at public relations. He's like the Don King of real estate. Like, this man can promote anything. He can slap his name on something and sell it. He does the exact same thing in the political arena. So I think that he has been very brilliant in taking certain Republican concepts and highlighting those to the extent that we forget everything else, right? So I will just tell you this, and I will, this is my hill to die on. Donald Trump is not a Republican. He is a man who was elected under the Republican Party, but he himself, I don't believe, is a Republican because a lot of what he does is either not a Republican thing or it is completely opposite to what Republicans do. However, there are two main things that I think that he really latched onto that Republicans that we were willing to say, all right, but because of this, we'll let everything else slide. And the first one is that he was a counterswing. He is a counterswing to wildly progressive policies. That is it. It's the old, didn't really like you, but I like them less. And I think that um, is one thing that Democrats have just never understood, which is why when they're like, oh, we're going to keep fighting, and it's like, you are adding fuel to the fire because he is your counter. So the stronger you get or the louder you get, the stronger he gets. And so you are not canceling him out. You are simply feeding the fire. You are putting more logs on the fire. Like, congratulations. For all we know, he may try to run again because if you're going to, Kamala Harris, oh my gosh, how could you get any worse? AOC, great. You're just going to make another Trump, or like I said, he may try to run again. I don't know. And then the other one I think is patriotism. I think he recognized that a lot of Americans were tired of feeling bad about being Americans or being told that we had to feel bad for being Americans, right? And I think he came in and was like, no, we're going to be super patriotic. We're going to make America great again. We're going to have flags everywhere. And, after the last, I'd say, decade of being told that we should be ashamed of ourselves, I I am not surprised that a lot of people were like, yeah, you know what? I actually like it here. So I am going to be proud of it. Again, that is a counterswing to the progressive media. But having said all that, when it comes to things like the laws, like judges, like I don't know, separation of powers, those really are not his thing. Here's more from Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary.
The United States has run a trade deficit of goods every year since 1975. In 2024, our trade deficit in goods exceeded $1 trillion. Everybody agrees this is unacceptable. President Trump is delivering on his promise to fix this problem.
Remember how I told you about the patriotism thing? That's where this is coming in. So again, that was Caroline Leavitt, who's the White House spokesperson. And I am so glad that she said that because what she was talking about was the mandate that the Trump administration, that Trump believes he has, right? He believes that he was in large part elected to fix the trade deficit. Raise your hand if you know what a trade deficit is. I think a lot of people looked at the trade deficit and said, it is inherently unfair to America that we buy more stuff from other people than they buy from us. That is a deficit, right? We buy more things than we ship out. And so there is an uneven ledger, right? And it feels very grossly unfair to be like, how come you guys aren't buying my stuff, but I buy your stuff all the time? And I think he had brilliantly capitalized on that and made it seem very unfair. And is it unfair? I mean, depends on your definition. Why do we even have a trade deficit? We have a trade deficit because we have more money than most people, than most countries. America, even in some of our poorest cities, is more wealthy than than the entire world. All right. And so because we have more money, we spend more money. We like to buy more things. That is in large part why we have this trade deficit. And to be honest, it's really not the big deal that he makes it sound, but it is a form of, I think he's been able to twist it into a form of patriotism to say we are being treated unfairly and therefore I'm going to go after this for you. And the people who are trying to stop me, like these judges, are simply sleazebags. Actually, he didn't call the judges sleazebags. He called Leonard Leo, who was the former chair of the Federalist Society, a sleazebag who probably hates America. Like, who talks like that? I know we're, what is it, 8 years in now? 10 years in? 2016? Gosh, 9 years in? I should be used to the way that he talks, but it kills me. Leonard Leo, former chair of the Federalist Society. So just to back up, that was the organization that helped Trump pick his nominees. Because let's be honest, when he got into office in 2016, he didn't know these judges. And most people don't, right? This is like hiring a consultant to come in and be like, I got to fill all these vacancies. Who do you think? Like, who do you recommend? Well, the Federalist Society, and confession, I was a member of the Federalist Society, and I say was, I will renew my membership, but I usually forget until the middle of the year. But it is a group of conservative judges and lawyers, like or attorneys. They start in there's a branch in law school. And funny story, when I was in law school, I there was a like the first week of school, they have different clubs that come in and they're like, oh, come join our club. You can have like pizza for lunch or whatever. And so I was like, sounds great to me. And there's two competing groups. There's the Federalist Society and the Constitutionalist Society, I think. And I was like, I don't know which one is the conservative one. So I ended up going to the Constitutionalist Society because they had free pizza, and very quickly being like, oh, I'm in the wrong room. But I had already gotten some of their, I'm sitting there with their pizza. So I'm like, I should stay for the whole thing. And I did. But then, anyways, I ended up joining the Federalist Society. They were instrumental in giving Donald Trump advice on, hey, Amy Coney Barrett, like pick these judges because there's a lot of vacancies and Trump's not going to be reading resumes, right? He needs help with this stuff. So he brings them in. They, give him advice. And apparently now he's really upset because one of the judges on this Court of International Trade, it's a 3-judge panel. One of the judges was appointed by Reagan, one by President Obama, and one by Trump. And now he's all mad because he's like, why did you vote against me? I appointed you. And that is because Donald Trump does not understand the role of the judiciary. Just because you appoint them does not mean they are yours. It's not like in the private sector where you're like, I hired you, so I want you to back me up when we're in meetings and things like that, right? Which could be like somewhat rational, I guess. Judiciary doesn't work like that. You appoint these people, great. Now they are going to go on and they are going to rule based on their belief system of the laws, not based on the fact that you appointed them, right? And I think that Trump has never understood that. I think that when he got elected in 2016, he looked at the DOJ like a massive building full of his own personal attorneys. And it does not work that way. They are not your attorneys. Now, me as an attorney, my clients can call me, and I've had clients do this before, where they'll call me and, like, I want to sue so and so. And I'm like, oh, okay, but it's going to be such and such hourly. And if they say yes, then I'm like, all right, I guess we're suing so and so, because I am your hired gun for this, right? The Department of Justice does not work that way. And these judges that he appoints do not work that way. He has I don't think that it's that he doesn't understand it. I think it's that he doesn't like it. And so because he has such a bully pulpit and because he has this really like amazing ability to sway public opinion, I think he's going to continue to say these things for as long as it takes for him to get his way. Thanks for listening to Straight Talk with Europe C. Morgan. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and add this podcast on Spotify. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing to my Patreon to help keep the lights on around here. Just $5 goes a long way. Go to patreon.com/whymorganshow today, and don't forget to tell a friend. Do you ever hear something that sounds so off that you immediately say, let's ask more questions? Well, my hope would be that science would do that, but that doesn't seem to be the case. I want you to listen to this that came out in 2020 about a study involving Black and white babies.
Black newborns are more likely to survive childbirth when they are cared for by Black doctors. The study, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, reveals Black babies are 3 times more likely than white babies to die in the hospital when they are being cared for by white doctors. While the research found there is little difference to the survival rate of a white newborn in connection to the race of the doctor.
Well, that sounds terrifying, right? So just to back up, there was this study that came out in 2020, and it involved the mortality rates of Black babies versus white babies. And what they were saying there, according to the CBS News report from 2020, that the study showed that these babies had a higher mortality rate when these Black babies had a higher mortality rate when they were treated by white doctors. That's terrifying. If I had a Black baby, if I was Black and I had a baby, if I heard that study, I'd be like, oh, okay, then I need a Black doctor. I need what is going on? Or actually, what we should have done was ask more questions, because that sounds like such a terrifying statistic that the follow-up should be, okay, why? What's going on? Are they not checking in on these babies? Are they missing something obvious? What's going on? So I bring that up because that study was cited it went everywhere. Okay. So it was cited 700 times, I think over 700 times in Google Scholar. So, I mean, this has been cited in numerous other publications. It was even cited by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson in oral arguments in favor of affirmative action. So remember that Supreme Court case? She talked about this study as well. It was also cited in a supporting brief by the Association of American Medical Colleges and 45 other organizations that mentioned this study as evidence for, and I quote, for high risk Black newborns, having a Black physician is tantamount to a miracle drug. So, so what I'm saying is that the study came out and everyone took it as gospel and said, oh, that's right. Um, why? Because there is a new study that came out, kind of a follow up. This one was by George Boris and I want to make sure I get their names right. Robert Verbruggen, I believe. They looked at that same data set. It was 1.8 million kids, babies that were born between 1992 and 2015 in Florida. So they took that same data set that 2020 study used, and they looked at all the data and they looked at how the study was conducted, and they said, wait a second, there is something off about this. And what they concluded was that it was not the race of the doctor that had an effect on the baby's mortality rate. It was the birth weight of the child that affected the mortality rate. Now, hang on a second, because that is a massive difference, to say on the one hand that the mortality rate is maybe likely due to some form of racism as opposed to birth weight, which has nothing to do with racism. And what's scary about this is why this was missed. That's what, just as a little bit of background info, right? My undergrad was in biology. I loved, although was not super great at it, but I loved the scientific method. It's very similar to like the Socratic method in law, where I'm not asking you if you already know the answer. I'm trying to figure out how you got to the answer. And you're encouraged to ask more questions. So in the typical scientific method, you have a hypothesis, right? I'll go back to fourth grade. Like you are going to conduct an experiment. So you have a hypothesis. I think this is going to happen. Then you conduct your study. And then you decide, did my hypothesis come true? If yes, why? If no, why? But the end result is always why. You're encouraged to ask more questions. And then there's a peer review process in which you conduct your experiment and then it's put out to your peers and they're encouraged to basically tear it apart and try to recreate it and figure out what happened so that not to tear you down, we're not trying to hurt your feelings, but so that we can just like understand, is this a solid experiment? Are these results solid, right? Like we took it apart, we put it back together, we had different points of view looking at it, we had different, experts looking at it, and they all either came to the same conclusion, or maybe they came to a different conclusion, and now we have another, like, okay, well, my hypothesis was wrong then. Let's go down this path. That's the fun of science, is that you get to ask questions and do more experiments. That is not what happened in this case. Like I said, I read you some of the stats. It was cited by a Supreme Court justice, for heaven's sakes. Like people looked at this study and said, this is truth. And now we are finding out from other researchers that may not actually be the case. The authors of the original study, according to this comes from an article, by the way, in The Economist. But the authors of the original study controlled for various other factors, but they did not include very low birth weight, which is 1,500 grams, so under 1,500 grams. And apparently, very low birth weight accounted for nearly half of the infant mortality rate. That's huge. That's not a minor, like, oops, we didn't, account for their eye color. Okay, what does that matter? But their birth weight, that is a massive, massive loss to not count that. About 1% of babies born in the US are born underweight. Do you know what that rate is in the Black community? It is 3%. That is a much higher rate than the general American population. So what does that mean? If we were really interested in getting answers, the focus should then, right? So on the one hand, it's not even just that this study came out and it was grossly misinterpreted and everybody ran with it. It's why did everybody run with it? So this study came out apparently about 2 months after the death of George Floyd. So go back in the Wayback Machine. What was that like? COVID, right? We were talking about COVID. We're talking about all the social unrest that was going on. And then there's the death of George Floyd. And then there's the protests and the, you know, yeah, I guess it was like protests, you know, the streets were full and there were multiple other deaths, you know, during that same year as well. But you remember that time period. Everybody was on edge. There were riots, you know, there was a lot of fighting. There were a lot of threats of violence and things like that. And then this study comes out, and I think that this is a prime example of confirmation bias. We already had something in our heads, and then this study comes out that just confirms the bias that we already had. And so rather than ask questions, we're like, yeah, that works. And this is a very human response, you know, confirmation bias to say like, I just want somebody to agree with what I already believe. And when you see somebody that agrees with it, you're like, yeah, see, obviously they're a genius. You should all listen to them. Okay, well, that's wrong when it's particularly when it comes to science. Because think about this. The focus was all about racism. It was about, you know, ending racism. That's why it was used in oral arguments during the affirmative action Supreme Court case, because we were talking about race. When what should we have been talking about? Saving the lives of Black babies. And how do we do that? If we shift the focus from talking about racism to how to prevent premature birth, how to prevent Black babies from being underweight, now you are talking about realistic solutions that can save the lives of these children. But instead, we used confirmation bias for the last 5 years to basically just say, see, I told you it was racism, so that's it. I mean, think about what could have been done in those 5 years to prevent some of those very potentially preventable deaths. And then the question I thought was really interesting in The Economist, is the article that this came from, it was why this isn't being talked about. Why did I just see this on an Instagram feed, you know, and haven't been able to, you know, haven't seen anything else about this? Well, I think one thing, it might be because it just hasn't been noticed yet, according to the authors in the this Economist article. Maybe it just hasn't been noticed yet. Although that seems pretty sus, because what do you mean, you know, as soon as the first one came out, it's on the news. It's, you know, being cited hundreds of times. It's appearing in briefs for the Supreme Court. That took off like wildfire. But now there's nothing. The only article that I saw was, you know, scrolling on Instagram, and I see this in The Economist. Or the other thing is that it could just be purposely being ignored because, you know, it doesn't fit the particular agenda that certain people are trying to push. This is a very, very dangerous thing for everyone, particularly when the scientific community decides that confirmation bias is more important than real and accurate studies that have life-saving potential. Thanks for listening to Straight Talk with Eurypsy Morgan. We got some exciting stuff coming up, so make sure that you subscribe on our YouTube channel and invite your friends and family to do so too. You can also find us on iTunes and Spotify.